Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. After my first impressions video for Pathfinder WotR OST, I spent a lot more time playing this highly anticipated CRPG. So today we're going to talk about 5 things which I personally think this game does exceptionally well. Owlcat Games reached out to me and they asked me to make a couple of videos about the game. This video is sponsored by them just as the last one, by the way. If you plan to buy this game on Steam, use my link in the description and this way you'll support my channel. Anyway, here are 5 things that Pathfinder WotR OST does exceptionally well. Number 5. The setting. If you watched my first impressions video, you probably remember that I had some nice things to say about the setting. The premise of the setting is actually quite simple, which makes the game really easy to get into. It's a war between angels and demons, but the story and the lore behind it is really deep. This design approach is nothing new in gaming, it's simple yet very effective way of designing the game, if done properly of course. You take something that's familiar to basically everyone and start developing everything around it. As a new player in Pathfinder series, I highly appreciate this. This way the game manages to stay somewhat more accessible, even though the CRPG genre nowadays is targeting a more niche audience. If the premise was convoluted and unnecessarily complicated, the game would be a lot harder to get into. On the other hand, the lore can definitely be a bit overwhelming, especially if you don't know anything about this universe. But even so, I think that's a good balance to have in your game. You have a very simple side of it and an insane depth for those who want it. I would be a lot more disappointed with the lack of information about this world and all the prior events, even though I don't exactly prefer to be overwhelmed. The game could be a bit better with categorizing all the information in the dialogue, by the way. WotR OST gives you a lot of time to adapt to everything with a pretty lengthy tutorial zone. Now this can be considered as a good and a bad thing at the same time, but from a new player perspective I think that's great. On the other hand, if you played Kingmaker and you know what to expect, you're probably going to think the game is dragging on a little bit, especially in the beginning. I really don't see a better way to explain a D&D system to new players, so this is absolutely necessary. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. There is not a whole lot to say about this point. The simplicity of the setting makes it easier to pick the game up and understand the main gist of it, at least when it comes to the story.
I'm alright. I'm alright.
That's one of the things which will hopefully attract new players who are not that familiar with this genre. And yet, the story is not suffering from being shallow or anything close to that, so it's a win-win situation if you ask me. Number 4. Choices that matter. Now this is really important because it heavily affects the gameplay. If you're playing an RPG and you're not able to see the consequences of your actions, it's not a very good RPG, is it? I'm speaking specifically about the gameplay consequences, not just pointless dialogue options with the illusion of choice or the slideshow that some RPGs like to show you at the very end of the game. We're talking about the real consequences, which are noticeable right away or later in the playthrough. I was really vocal when it comes to gameplay choices and consequences in my RPG discussion videos. Check that playlist out if you're interested. Anyway, Pathfinder WotR OST does a great job when it comes to this, even in the beginning hours of the game. It's especially noticeable with all the characters in your party and just characters you're going to meet in general. I didn't expect to lose the opportunity to recruit some of the characters I met early on, but I did. And not just when it comes to recruiting them, there's a lot more to it, but I don't want to spoil anything.
Oh, skip the pleasantries.
The game is very unapologetic in general, so having those hard-hitting consequences shouldn't be surprising. The decisions you're going to make in quests are no different, and you can straight up kill a lot of people you meet if it happens that you don't like them for just existing. These kinds of bold decisions are a bit rare in RPGs nowadays if you think about it. Not a lot of studios are comfortable with losing a chunk of content just because they want to give the player the option to play recklessly. Well, Pathfinder WotR OST just doesn't care. It seems like almost every situation in the game gives you at least one relatable option for the type of character you want to play. And of course, this is related to alignment system. The game makes you think before you choose to press any option in the dialogue, which is not something that I can say for a lot of modern RPGs. The main story of the game is no different. You get to choose between 9 mythic paths which will ultimately shape your character in a big way. Not just from the narrative side of things, but the gameplay as well. So just in general, every choice in the game seems to matter, whether it's how you build your characters, the quests, dialogues and so on. And more importantly, the consequences of your actions are really impactful. I think this should be a high priority for basically every RPG. Number 3. Character creation. The character creation menu in a lot of RPGs is judged by how many options you have for, well, customizing your character. However, it's mostly related to the visual customization. While Wrath of the Righteous does not lack the options for visual customization, it excels when it comes to creating and planning out your builds. There are just an insane amount of options you have, which are presented really well with a great UI design. The UI design in this game is something that I heavily praised in my first impressions video, and for a good reason. It's one of the best, if not the best UI design that I've seen in recent years, which is especially important in a game with overwhelming amount of information. Anyway, there are 25 classes along with different subclasses, as well as 12 character races. The game also has a more than useful class progression screen, where you can basically plan out your entire builds. To be fair, a lot of options in the character creation menu are not that useful to new players, and especially if you don't know a lot about D&D rules. I'm not exactly an expert when it comes to D&D rule set, especially when it comes to Pathfinder, and I always need to remind myself how things work. But whenever something new happens in the gameplay, like some specific mechanic, you will get a useful tip that explains everything. And like I said in my first impressions video, tips can be annoying in a lot of games, but in a D&D RPG like Pathfinder, it's a godsend. You can also respec all of your characters after the tutorial zone, so you don't need to worry a lot about messing up their builds. And you get the same customization options that you had in the beginning of the game. It's not only about your main character, every member of your party can get the same amount of attention when it comes to their builds. New players can get some useful tips and recommended builds for each character, as well as the option to automatically level up your party. I think it's not hard to see why the character creation in this game is great. It's extensive, well presented, and they try their best to explain the complicated D&D rule set with a great UI design. Number 2. The characters.
Hey, Chief! Hey, Dreamboat, come over here! I want to talk to you about something. Something really important.
Well, yet another point with the character in the title. But this time around we're talking about the characters themselves. I tend to forget the names of NPCs in RPGs, even when I find the characters to be memorable. I'm just bad with names, but I'm pretty sure I remember all the important NPC names in Wrath of the Righteous. Characters that you can recruit in your party have interesting backstories and unique dialogue interactions. Just as your main character, all of them have unique alignments, and the way they act is heavily affected by that. Not always though, because that would make them really predictable. There will be situations which will put their beliefs on the test, and you will have the option to affect the outcome of those situations. So they try their best to prevent the characters from becoming one-dimensional. There is some not so subtle foreshadowing as well, which makes you wonder about their intentions. I always liked weird and goofy characters, but only if they are not overdone. Amber fits perfectly in that description. She's weird and really interesting.
Oh, what is it? It tickles.
They tried to burn this girl on the stake, but she somehow survived, and she's not even mad about it. She has some dialogue lines which will either confuse or annoy people, and that's why I like her. Her voice can be a bit annoying though, it's really high-pitched.
Surrender or else!
Some of the characters like Scylla and Lan have that stereotypical D&D profile. Scylla is a righteous paladin and Lan is a classical jokester who is rarely serious. But that only becomes a problem if the characters are badly written and boring, which is not the case here.
Are we in trouble yet?
The thing which could make them even better is more voice-acted lines. It will make the party banter and everything in general a lot more immersive and interesting. The game is really inconsistent with the voice acting, so you have to do a lot of reading. I really hope we get more voice acted lines in some future enhanced edition or something like that. But yeah, the characters are very memorable. Number 1. The combat. The way that combat feels in Wrath of the Righteous could make some action RPGs feel ashamed. The sound and visual effects are amazing, along with the brutal finishing animations and ragdolls.
My blade!
To be honest, I never thought the combat experience could feel like this in a CRPG of all things. If you're following my channel, you know that I talk a lot about action combat mechanics from various role-playing games. That's one of my biggest passions on the channel in general. I was amazed with the amount of different visual effects for each spell and how impactful the melee weapon sounds. The amount of blood on the screen reminds me of Dragon Age Origins a bit, which is over the top but still great. When it comes to technical side of things, Wrath of the Righteous has a real-time with pause and a turn-based mode. I know that people who play these types of games usually prefer just one of these gameplay modes and they hate the other one with a burning passion. It's kinda silly, but there you go. When you try to think about it objectively, it's always great to have different choices, especially when it comes to actual gameplay experience. But when this is the case, it's natural that people will think that one of these gameplay modes is far superior and that the other one received less attention. I can only speak for myself and the experience I had with real-time with pause because that's what I personally prefer. Although I did some research about the turn-based mode and people seem to like how it's done. The only negative thing I could hear about it is the slight difference when it comes to difficulty. People say that some encounters are less challenging, but I think this is because of the turn-based system itself and not the game in general. You have more time to react in turn-based mode than just the facts. I don't think this is a huge issue, you can always increase the difficulty a bit if you think it's not challenging enough for you. And trust me, at least one of these difficulty settings will be able to give you the challenge you want. Anyway, I personally prefer real-time with pause over turn-based combat in general. So naturally I played through the game without switching to turn-based mode a lot. And that's the thing, you can switch between these two modes whenever you like, even in the middle of the combat. The game just adapts seamlessly. When it comes to difficulty, I'm still playing on Daring and I had plans to switch on Core, but I don't think I'm gonna do that. The game becomes progressively more challenging, which is expected of course, but I had the feeling that Daring difficulty is not that hard. Until I started fighting some various bosses and stronger enemies in general, and I don't really want to be stuck on a boss for hours. So I'm perfectly fine with Daring, at least on this playthrough. The game has a steady flow of challenging fights which will make you use everything you have. If that wasn't the case, all the praise I had for the combat wouldn't matter at all. There are some specific fights that had some issues. It felt like the game is cheating a bit in order to kill you and justify the harder difficulty. If that was actually the case, it shouldn't be hard to fix it with a patch or something. Other than that, I think the fights feel great in general and the progression feels very good as well.
I'm sorry I have to do this.
And those will be the 5 things that Wrath of the Righteous does exceptionally well, in my opinion of course. Tell me, do you agree or disagree in the comments below, and do you plan to play this game or not? If you decide to buy the game on Steam, use the link that I provided in the description and this way you'll support my channel. I hope you found this video entertaining or informative, and if you did, pressing the thumbs up button would mean a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more RPG content. If you want to support the channel in the long run, consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. You can get your name on the end credits, as well as some other perks like early access to videos, Discord roles, my plans for future content, etc, etc. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.